Get ready for a spine-chilling experience. If you love feeling your heart race and the suspense creeping into the room, you're in the right place. But before we begin, I have an invitation for you. If you truly have the courage to face the unknown, go ahead and hit that like button now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories. Share this video with someone who also loves the thrill of fear, but be careful. The scariest things tend to happen when you least expect it. Are you ready to face what's coming next? Let's see if you can handle it. The session began on a Friday night with an atmosphere of curiosity and slight trepidation. Sarah, the leader of the group and the person who proposed the idea, was obsessed with trying to contact her brother, who had died in a car accident. "I know he wants to talk to me," he whispered, as he adjusted the candles around the board. His friends, Jason, Lena, and Tom, watched with apprehension, but curiosity kept them there. Jason, the most skeptical one, laughed nervously as he looked at the board. "Do you really think this will work?" he asked, but deep down, something in him wanted to believe it too. Lena and Tom looked at each other, feeling the tension in the air increase as they sat around the board. "Let's just try," Sarah said, her voice shaky but determined. They placed their fingers on the pointer of the tablet, and after a brief pause, Sarah whispered, "Brother, are you here?" The pointer began to move slowly, and everyone looked at each other in disbelief. Initially, the letters formed disconnected words, but soon, a sentence was formed. "I am." Sarah felt a shiver run up her spine, while Jason, still skeptical, looked at the board with wide eyes. The group continued to ask questions, and the pointer moved with each one, as if they were actually talking to someone on the other side. With each answer, Sarah felt her brother's presence, and tears ran down her face. "He's here," she said, excited. However, the answers began to change tone when Jason jokingly challenged the spirit. "If you really are her brother, prove it." The previously slow pointer began moving quickly, spelling out specific details of Sarah's life that only her brother would know. The group fell silent, terrified but unable to stop. Lena, who was visibly nervous, tried to get up, but Sarah grabbed her arm. "I think he's angry," Lena whispered, looking at the others in fear. Then the board wrote, "You shouldn't play with me." Jason let out a nervous laugh, but his expression was pale. The pointer began to move on its own, and a clear message emerged. "I am not who you think I am." Sarah stepped back, feeling an inexplicable terror wash over her. That wasn't his brother's presence. The silence in the room was oppressive, and no one dared take their hands off the board. The air felt thicker, and a cold sensation ran down everyone's spines. Sarah, shaking, tried to end the session. "We're leaving now," he said, but the needle kept moving frantically, as if refusing to let them go. "You opened the door for me," said the message on the board. "Now I'm with you." Jason pulled his hands off the board, yelling for everyone to stop. "This is no joke," he shouted, while Sarah and the others tried to remain calm. But it was too late. Lena began to cry, claiming to feel something touch her shoulder, even though no one was there. "Please, let's stop," he begged. But the pointer continued to move on its own, without anyone touching it. The last message the tablet spelled out was chilling. "You belong to me now." Everyone felt a chill. Jason, trying to maintain control, blew out the candles all at once. The session was officially over, but something inside them said that the portal opened that night would never be completely closed. That same night, each of the friends went home feeling restless and exhausted, but the real nightmare was just beginning. Sarah, as she lay down, heard whispers in her room, as if someone was speaking softly next to her. Fear prevented her from moving. She covered herself, wishing it was all just a dream. But then, a cold voice whispered in his ear, "I'm with you." Jason couldn't sleep either. He closed his eyes, but was overcome by disturbing visions of a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed, eyes glowing in the dark. He tried to ignore it, but the figure got closer every time he blinked. At the end of the night, he woke up screaming, with the vision of the figure still imprinted in his mind. Lena and Tom reported similar experiences the next day. They both heard whispers and saw shadows moving around the house. "We can't all have had the same nightmare," Lena said, her voice cracking with fear. They knew that the spirit they spoke to on the tablet was not a friendly spirit. Something evil had been released. On the third day after the session, Jason didn't show up for the scheduled meeting with his friends. He didn't respond to messages or calls, and concern gripped the group. They decided to go to his house, but when they arrived, the place was completely silent. The door was unlocked, and when they entered, they noticed that the lights were off and the house was in disarray. While searching for Jason, they found the Ouija board on the kitchen table. A terrifying message was written on the wood in what looked like dried blood. "I am with him," Lena screamed when she saw that, and everyone felt terror overcome them. This wasn't just a coincidence. Jason was being held by something much worse than anyone imagined. The police were called, but they found no sign of Jason. Sarah, Lena, and Tom, racked with guilt, decided to destroy the tablet, hoping it would end the nightmare. They burned it and threw the ashes into a nearby river, but the feeling that they were being watched did not disappear. The tablet may have been destroyed, but the evil it released was still there. That night, Sarah woke up to a strange sound coming from the hallway of her house. Heavy, slow footsteps, as if someone was wandering around the house. With her heart racing, she stood up and followed the sound, stopping in the living room. The board, which they had destroyed, lay intact on the table. She felt the ground slip away from her feet. That wasn't possible. The tablet was there, exactly as before, and the pointer was moving slowly, forming a frightening message. "I never left." Sarah collapsed to the floor, terrified, as the board continued to spell out threatening words. She knew the nightmare wasn't over. The next day, when telling what she saw, Lena and Tom were silent. Both had had similar experiences. The tablet had reappeared in their homes too, bearing the same message. "He's with us all," Tom whispered, feeling his despair rising. They knew that destroying the tablet would not be enough to free themselves from the curse. Each night, visions of the shadowy figure intensified. Sarah saw the shadow approaching her whenever she turned off the lights. He felt a presence beside him, an icy breath that made his skin crawl. She began to avoid sleeping, but with each wakefulness her figure seemed to grow stronger. The same happened with Lena and Tom, who isolated themselves more and more. In a desperate attempt, they decided to seek help. They found a renowned medium who had agreed to perform an exorcism, but upon entering Sarah's house, the woman stopped, staring wide-eyed into space. "You brought something very old, and it doesn't want to go away," he said, his voice shaking. The medium performed the ritual, but the spirit resisted, mocking her with dark laughter that echoed throughout the house. "He's arresting us," whispered the woman, at the end of the ritual, defeated. "You opened the door and now it can never be closed again." The words resonated like a death sentence. Desperate, Sarah, Lena, and Tom decided to perform one last session on the tablet, believing they could make the spirit respond. "If he wants something, let's ask him directly," Sarah said, a dark gleam in her eyes. They sat around the board and for the last time asked, "What do you want?" The response was instant and terrifying. "I want you." The pointer began to move on its own, faster and faster, spelling out threats and revealing dark secrets that they had never told anyone. It was as if the spirit was feeding on their fear, growing stronger with each word. At the height of terror, the pointer broke free from the board, flying towards Tom and hitting him in the chest. He fell to the ground with an expression of absolute terror. He's here," he said, his voice broken, before being enveloped by a dense shadow and disappearing before the terrified eyes of his friends. After the tragedy with Tom, Sarah and Lena tried to escape, but wherever they went, they felt the presence of the spirit. He had become part of them. There was nowhere to run. The shadow they had invoked in the first session was now linked to their lives in an unbreakable way. In the following days, the presence intensified, and each of them began to lose their sense of reality. Lena disappeared a week later, leaving only a message written in her own blood on her wall. "I am with him." Sarah knew she would be next. With no alternative, Sarah returned home to find the board waiting for her on the table. The last message awaited her, like a final signature of horror. You will never be alone again. Sarah was never seen again. Friends and family tried to locate her, but all they found was an empty house and the Ouija board on the table, with a new message. Come and play with me. After Sarah's disappearance, rumors began to spread throughout the city. Friends, family, and even neighbors avoided the house, fearing that the spirit that haunted it would follow anyone who dared to cross its doors. Some claimed to have seen lights flickering in the windows at night, while others swore they heard muffled whispers and occasional screams coming from inside. The house, abandoned and forgotten, became a symbol of fear. One night, Ethan, a former classmate of Sarah's and one of the few who knew the story of the Ouija board, decided to confront the mystery. He didn't believe in spirits, but something inside him compelled him to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and questionable courage, Ethan entered through the half-open door. An acrid, stagnant smell filled the air, as if the place was awaiting his presence. Every step he took resonated through the empty house, and shadows danced around him, distorted by the dim light of the lantern. In the center of the living room on the dusty table was the Ouija board. A note next to it, written in shaky handwriting, said, "To anyone who finds this, do not touch. It is waiting." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine, but, defying the warning, he placed his fingers on the pointer. The real terror was just beginning. As soon as he touched the pointer, the temperature in the room dropped drastically. Ethan watched the board carefully, still in disbelief, until he felt a slight pressure under his fingers. The pointer began to move, forming letters erratically. First, he spelled his name, Ethan, followed by a long silence. Ethan tried to pull his hand away, but he felt an invisible force holding him there. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice wavering as terror took hold of his mind. The pointer moved quickly, forming the words, "You know who I am." Ethan felt a wave of panic, but he continued, forcing himself to maintain control. "What do you want?" The hand stopped and then, with impressive speed, responded, "All of you." Suddenly, Ethan's flashlight began to blink, and he noticed that a shadow, much darker than the pitch darkness around him, was approaching him. The silhouette seemed to pulse, as if it were alive, and the air around Ethan began to feel heavy. It was as if the spirit, or whatever it was trying to cross over into the physical world. The presence was real, and now, Ethan knew he had made a fatal mistake. After the experience in the house, Ethan fled, but the dark presence he had awakened seemed to follow him wherever he went. At home, the lights flickered, and he heard muffled laughter echoing through the empty rooms. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, horrible visions tormented him. Deformed faces, moving shadows, and icy hands that pulled him back to Sarah's house. Ethan began to realize that the visions were not just dreams, but a direct connection to the spirit. He saw Sarah's last nights, feeling her despair, hearing the whispers that tortured her until, finally, she disappeared. In one of the visions, he saw Sarah's final message forming on the tablet. "Come and play with me." Desperate, Ethan went to a city priest and told the whole story, but was ignored. The priest refused to get involved, calling it madness. Ethan's frustration and fear pushed him over the edge. He knew the spirit was approaching, and he felt his time was running out. With each passing second, the shadow grew closer. In a last-ditch effort, Ethan decided to turn to the same psychic Sarah had contacted before. The medium, an elderly woman with piercing eyes, looked at him with regret as she heard his story. "The spirit you freed is no ordinary spirit," she said. "It's an ancient entity, something that feeds on fear and despair. The tablet you used was a trap, a portal he had been waiting for a long time." She explained that, to try to seal the spirit again, it would be necessary to perform an ancient ritual that required an emotional sacrifice. "You will have to face your worst fears and accept whatever pain he inflicts on you," he warned, as Ethan listened with shaky determination. It was either that or become the next missing person. That night, Ethan returned to Sarah's house with the medium. They lit candles around the board, creating a circle of protection. The ritual began, and Ethan felt the spirit's presence intensify. As if the entity was waiting, the medium began chanting ancient words, but the entity retaliated, casting horrifying visions directly into Ethan's mind. The air around them seemed to freeze as the candles flickered. Ethan felt his body give in to the weight of the evil presence. He saw the shadowy figure in the corner of the room, smiling at him as the medium began to scream. The ritual was working, but at a terrible cost. As the ritual progressed, Ethan saw his worst memories come to life. He relived every loss, every failure, and every trauma he had experienced. The entity not only showed his fears, but magnified them, distorting them until he could barely distinguish reality from nightmare. The visions suffocated him, and he struggled not to give in to madness, with the medium shouting in the background for him to resist. The entity was enraged, and the walls of the house began to shake, cracks spreading across the ceiling and floor. The medium, sweating and shaking, continued to chant the ritual, trying to keep the spirit trapped while Ethan confronted the horror. "He's getting stronger," she warned, her voice thick with dread. "He wants you, Ethan." With one last cry of despair, Ethan challenged the spirit. "I'm not afraid of you." The entity laughed, its voice echoing throughout the room. "Everyone is afraid, Ethan," whispered the figure, now in a more defined form, his eyes glowing with inhuman hatred. Ethan realized he was losing. He couldn't beat him with willpower. In a final act of desperation, he threw himself at the board, shattering it into pieces with a powerful kick. The impact was like an explosion, throwing him backwards as the entity's presence seemed to weaken. The medium shouted for him to leave immediately. The connection had been severed, but the spirit was still there, weakened and furious. Ethan and the medium fled the house, and soon after, authorities sealed it off, prohibiting access. But even so, Ethan knew he wasn't completely safe. The visions did not leave him, and he continued to see the shadowy figure in his dreams, with the same repetitive whisper. "I am with you." Ethan returned to his everyday life, but the shadow followed him. He felt its presence at random moments, in the mirror's reflection, in shadows in the corner of his eye, in hushed whispers. The ritual had weakened the spirit, but it was still there, waiting for the right moment to return. One night, as he was trying to sleep, he heard the familiar creak of the pointer on the Ouija board. Looking around, he saw nothing, but he knew the connection hadn't been completely severed. The spirit was still there, waiting for a new opportunity. And now, he knew that the door between the worlds could no longer be closed. Sarah's house and the Ouija board would forever remain cursed.